Oh my god, Reynard! They almost got me!
What's going on, Daniel? You look as if you've seen a ghost.
I saw the birds! A whole flock of them! Birds with steak knives and skewers! They almost got me!
Oh, Daniel. This all could have been avoided. I thought I told you to watch Hayao Miyazaki's new anti-bird PSA, The Boy and the Heron.
Oh, what?
How do you live, Daniel?
Birds are always plotting your demise. That parakeet in your crazy aunt's living room or seagull on the sidewalk may look innocent and harmless enough, but make no mistake, that thing is a goddamn dinosaur. There are nothing but dark thoughts behind those beady avian eyes, nothing but malice in the curve of that beak. You'd better believe that if presented the opportunity, it would dig its talons into your feeble flesh, gorging itself and only wanting more. Only its small size and hollow bones hold it back from being a true apex predator. The chances of a bird killing you may be low, but they are never zero. So that's what you got from Hayao Miyazaki's new movie,
That's my main take home.
Well, it's an interesting takeaway.
I don't think there's really much else going on, really.
Little things like like the purpose of your life and how you move on from grief. It's secondary.
Yeah.
It's secondary.
Been there.
So we are talking about Hayao Miyazaki's new movie, The Boy and the Heron, is what it's being called internationally. In Japan, it's being called How Do You Live? I think it's interesting because when they first released this in Japan, there was very specifically no advertising for it. There was one poster, and then there's no trailers, no promotional images, nothing. They're just very blind, going into it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, obviously for it's coming over to the United States, we gotta make sure we get the trailers. We gotta get all that stuff.
Roll out the usual red carpet.
It's definitely it's a movie that's, I have to say, is quite different from a lot of Miyazaki's other movies. Because, he can veer into, things that I feel a little esoteric, but there's still a pretty solid through line. I guess he's a conventional through line through the story.
Sure.
Whereas here, this feels a lot more abstract in what it's going for.
Yeah, I think when I was reflecting back on it and trying to kind of take from it what I would, it really struck me as being an old man's movie, and I don't mean that in the sense of an angry boomer that's why can't we say slurs anymore or something like that. That's Mel Gibson's kind of angry old man movie, but this is more just somebody who's had a lot of, if I dare invoke last week, they've had a lot of lived experiences, and they just kind of view life in a different way. There's kind of an ambiguity and almost an ambivalence to this movie that's definitely different. It's always a treat to get a new Ghibli film, but I didn't find myself quite responding to this on the level of what I would use some of either his or just the studio at large as absolute masterpieces. And I think it's just because I am a little bit more drawn to the kind of elemental totemic storytelling of Princess Mononoke or Spirited Away or something like that. But this film is kind of moved past that. There's a universality to those movies that I respond to, but this one's kind of saying, well, what if there's something a little bit more subtle to life than that?
Yeah, this is a movie that has a lot of things it's trying to say. And it's interesting that you call it an old man's movie, because apparently Miyazaki, he had been talking about his mindset when he was making this movie. And he said it was something that he wanted to make for his grandkids, because he's Grandpa won't be around too much longer. This is something that I want to give to you before I move on.
That's very
so
Miyazaki.
it does kind of, yeah. And I think that's interesting. So, again, we're just kind of jump right into talking about the movie and what happens in it. But one of the things, so the way it gets its name, something that's very interesting. The original Japanese name, again, being How Do You Live? And there's a book that main character Mahito, the movie opens with him losing his mother in American firebombing during World War II. Which, I just have to say, speaking as someone who has spent the two and a half years of his life, like the past 2.5 years, working on that Grave of the Fireflies video, and watching that over and over and over again, learning about like all the historical context of it. When this movie opened up like that, I was like, oh my god. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It's all coming back. But he loses his mother, and his father, he and his father, they go to countryside where, to his mother's family's home.
Yeah.
And to kind of come back to main point is making about the title of this movie, he finds something that his mother was going to give him, this book called How Do You Live? Which is a real book, actually.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that even though this movie is called How Do You Live, it is not an adaptation of the book. And not even in like it's like a spiritual... Well, I'll get to my point in a moment.
Yeah.
So, the book appears within the movie, and I looked into the book, which is, I read the Wikipedia article about it, so kind of take this with a little grain of salt. But from what I gathered, the book itself is structured like a diary that an uncle puts together for his nephew, with different parts addressing some issue the kid is facing in his life. And seeing that, this film feels like it's structured in a similar way, where like different scenes will be put together, and like one scene kind of flow into the next, and it'll be talking about something different, something new, like some different thing is going on. And it also kind of fits into the broader context of what Miyazaki was talking about, where it's like, wanting to make this for, someone younger in his life that he wants to learn from him, in the same way that in the book the uncle is putting this together for his nephew.
Yeah, like the journey that Mahito goes on during the kind of back half of the film sort of is like him, I guess, discovering for himself that same kind of life lesson in a more abstract way, I suppose.
Yeah. It has an almost like an Alice in Wonderland kind of feel to it, where it's like, oh, there's this thing that's happening, this concept that's being expressed, and then we'll move on to like a different concept.
Yeah, the opening of the film read very much as like a Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe analog for me, like the whole like kind of leaving the besieged, bombed out city to this kind of like rural retreat where you can kind of have this period of self-discovery. Obviously also the connection with World War II on a different front. But yeah, that it does kind of shift as he kind of learns more about the estate that his, fathers brought them to.
And on this estate, there's like 7 old women. And honestly, it was kind of because like I did a review of that terrible new Disney movie Wish.
Oh no.
And they try to do a thing there where it's like, oh, like the 7 dwarves are the friends, and it's so like nothing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of because I got like kind of like a similar, almost like 7 dwarves kind of vibe here, except obviously it's good in this movie.
I love the way that Miyazaki's like character design works for like old people. Like they're just these like adorable little goblins or something.
It's a natural life cycle. It's like because you have like little wide-eyed baby face anime baby, and then you grow up and you're like, oh, anime, like the slim nose, the sleek features. And then you hit 60 and boom.
You just get all the
Goblin
cartilage.
mode. But yeah, like I love like they're all having daring. They all get a chance to like they develop like a little bit. Although one of them kind of gets a bit more screen time, which is Kiriko, who goes with Mahito on this big journey.
I mean, her primary motivation is cigarettes. Let's be honest, but
yeah. For those listening to us, you might notice that we're kind of jumping around a bit, but this is a movie where it's like I usually will put together an outline for these recordings, but I had a really hard time putting together like a linear fashion of what to talk about with this movie.
Yeah, and so instead we have my insane person like paragraph form like ramblings. Though I think for the purpose of this movie, like the plot, like the implications of it are very tangled and complicated, but like the literal events are fairly like cut and dry and simple. So I think it if we just kind of move along the general plot, it's more of a vehicle for everything else that makes this movie so interesting to kind of discuss and contemplate.
Yeah, as I kind of going through, it's kind of straightforward like that, but then it goes in all these different things. Like one bit will connect to something later on. And also in my defense, apparently like at the world premiere screening of this movie, at the end of it, Hayao Miyazaki himself said, "Perhaps you didn't understand it. I myself don't understand it."
That's what I should have said every time I like turned in a paper during school. Just reverse card that like, shit.
Like, this doesn't make any sense. That's because it doesn't teach.
So we like at the estate that he's moved out to, the father works at a factory kind of outside this small village or whatever they are, and he's living with Mahito, the son, spends most of his day with these old grannies and reluctantly with his aunt, who is now also his mother-to-be. I guess the dad has a type.
Yeah, I saw this with a lovely lady I'm dating right now, and when she got out of the theater, she loved it. She was like, that is a little weird that he lost his wife and then just married her younger sister.
I mean, I guess it does say there were like 3 years, so I guess it's not like immediate, but it is still it's a choice.
Yeah, it's like, but yeah, so it was a very, and you can kind of see that right away, like Mahito is he's not super on board with it. Yeah. And we hear like, when he meets his new stepmother, Natsuko. They're right. Yeah, and they're right back. She's like, "Oh, look, I'm pregnant. See, you can feel the baby." And it's kind of like, oh, she means well, but I could also imagine a boy this age being like, "Oh, there's gonna be like a new child. Am I gonna be like gonna have to compete with these kids? Am I gonna be pushed away?"
That's such a power move on her part. Jesus Christ.
But over the course of this opening, we see that she does genuinely care about Mahito. Like, he's resting. She kind of comes in and he cleans up a little bit. She's like she cares about him.
In this stretch, she's very much not like the jealous stepmother kind of figure or whatnot.
Yeah, it's like she's... And I think it's important because there's going to be a big thing near the end. I guess not near the end, kind of like 2/3 of the way through. But, so this is all being established. And then a Heron comes by and just starts... Things start getting a little freaky.
Yeah, we start to get our little kind of magical elements that creep in. And
I've only... Yeah. I was going to say, so I've only seen this subtitled with the original Japanese dub. You've seen both the subtitled and the voiceover dub.
Yes. I decided to watch both. I guess like there's always that age-old question of like dub versus sub, and generally I prefer the original language of an animated film, but like I do feel like, with a couple minor exceptions, like, the Ghibli dubs are pretty solid. I think they did a really good job here, but, like, yeah, it was like I watched the Japanese version first, and listening to the Heron, I was like, oh, I knew Willem Dafoe was in the cast, and I was like, oh, he's basically doing a Willem Dafoe impression the whole time. And plot twist is fucking Robert Pattinson being like an absolute maniac for 2 hours, and it was. I hope he keeps making wild choices, like this. Like, more of this, please.
Yes. In this house, we love and respect Robert Pattinson.
Exactly. And, like, I mean, while we're on these, like, I think Florence Pugh is also an interesting choice. Like, her character, the grandma that follows him into the second half of the film, at least my recollection of the dub was, like, that voice actor just kind of found a happy medium between the two, that kind of works in both, like, guises of that character, old and younger. But, like, Florence Pugh is, like, has a complete change. She's, like, really in granny mode in the first half, and completely shifts, like, her vocal, like, posturing in the second, which is really interesting. And I was kind of going into it, like, love her to death, but she sounds like a chain smoker sometimes. And I was like, it was like, oh, you can ride that out. That sounds pretty, like, age ambiguous, but she did an interesting job too with her choices. So yeah, this Heron is a lot to unpack visually, vocally, nosily, nasally.
Oh my god, yeah, like, you know, because he starts kind of like messing around with Mahito. He starts messing around with Mahito, and he's like mimicking like the sounds of like his mother in her final moments, or like he was dreaming of. And Mahito eventually confronts him at the pond, and Heron is like, "Oh, your presence is requested. You know, like, I will take you to your mother. She is alive." And then like frogs start swarming, like, and then the fish come out. And then like the Heron starts showing like teeth, and I was like, okay, it's game over. The Heron's got teeth now, like human teeth. No.
Birds with teeth. We're shutting it all down.
And just like you see more and more, like there's like some weird stuff going on, because you see like there's a pair of eyes and a nose and a beak, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here?
I love how, like, you know, again, we talked about, like, briefly about kind of characters, and I love how this character goes, like, and it kind of comes and goes, but like the Heron is like, can be such like an elegant, like these like long, like kind of curving lines and stuff, and the way he like moves his wings and stuff is really beautiful in a way. It's all like balletic or something. And then like, but within this, you know, kind of dignified figure is this like fucking little goblin man that's got a giant nose and just basically wears like a little like bird, I don't know, kigurumi hoodie thing most of the time. It can't fly very well. It's kind of like defangs this like refined figure.
Yeah. And it is kind of interesting. You know, I wonder if that in itself could be like a thematic thing, because it's like, you know, when you're a kid, you're so like, oh, things are so powerful and untouchable. And then you get to be an adult, you're like, oh, nobody knows what's going on, actually.
We're all just making it up.
You know, it's like, you know, adults are like powerful, all-knowing beings. You know, your teacher, your parent. And then you get to be like 25 and you're like, oh.
We suck.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the world's kind of messed up, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it's
so
yeah.
I think that could be like an interesting, almost not even like an arc, so I'd say, but like an interesting little dimension there.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. And I think like this is one of those films where it's like there's so many little kernels of ideas, and some of them kind of blossom to something bigger that can be delved more into. But like, it's one of those things where if you can kind of support an idea, I think there's like grounds for it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because like, I feel like because I really like this movie, but I feel like I haven't quite understood it yet. And like it drives me, it's driving me mad because whenever I see a movie, I like to like dig into it, kind of put together some reading of it, and then present that. But with this one, there's just so much going on, in a good way, I would say. But there's so much going on that I'm like, I don't know. I really like, hopefully as we keep talking, I'll kind of be able to uncover more little ideas and be like, oh.
You can have a little therapy session. I will be billing, but that's fine. Yeah, no, I think I think it's part of like a film like this. That's almost by design. It's like, it's not obtuse, but it's just kind of not going to reveal everything just directly. And you kind of have to approach this and sort of like meditate on it and think about what does it mean, if it means anything, and walk away with your own reading of it.
Yeah. You look at like Kiki's Delivery Service, it's pretty straightforward what the movie is trying to say, what the movie is about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this one you got there's a lot going on.
Yeah, well, I feel like you mentioned Kiki's Delivery Service or like Spirited Away. He's like didactic almost. It's like, this is the value of hard work. Whereas with this one, even to your point of, him kind of being like, well, even I don't really know what this is. It's a more like him kind of, it's a more cerebral internal exercise for himself in a way, rather than him teaching us something. It kind of does. It can teach, but it doesn't. It's not unidirectional.
Yeah. It's like, most, because movies would be like, the lesson of today is this, or the lesson of the day is that. And here it's like, I hope you got all that.
Yeah.
Okay. Although, like, there is this scene here where, so like, Mahito, like, he gets sent to school, which doesn't go very well, doesn't get along with the other kids. It doesn't help that the school, again, with it being so late in the war and the national mobilization laws have been put in place. Again, like, I know all this stuff.
Yeah.
But, so they're not even doing, like, schoolwork. They're, like, in the fields. They're, like, doing manual labor. He doesn't get along with the other kids. And to kind of like, get out of all this, he walks away, picks up a rock, and hits himself in the head with it.
That drew, like, audible gasps at both of the screenings I went to. And it, like...
Didn't you? Go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, and just, like, these, like, Mononoke tier, like, just torrents of blood. It was a lot.
Didn't you say at the English dub screening that there's, like, kindergartners?
Oh, fucking Christ. Yeah, there was an entire... I, like, sat down and, like, someone, like, my chair was vibrating, and I look over my shoulder, and there's, like, a row of, like, 8... let's just say primary school aged children at this screening of fucking The Boy and the Heron with the parent, and God, like, they just kept kicking the seat, and I was like, this isn't gonna stop. And so I like turn and I look over my shoulder and put on my biggest smile, and I look at the nearest child and I'm like, hi, you're not gonna kick my seat anymore, are you? And I turn back around and like it keeps happening. And so I turn with my other shoulder to the parent and I'm like, hi, you know that the Sewing of Wish is actually like across the lobby, right? And I did feel like a little bit of an asshole, but I was like, oh, these fucking... Yeah, they just were running up and it was like a fucking zoo. And I'm like, this is a temple that I'm in. I'm at worship service right now and it's fucking bullshit is happening. Yeah, so like, I really wanted for them to be traumatized by like the firebombing of Tokyo and like him bludgeoning himself and stuff. Like, I don't even think they're paying enough attention to like be traumatized, which is sad.
Oh, well, hopefully the desecration did not impede your enjoyment.
I enjoyed it well enough.
Very good. Very good. Where was I? Oh, yeah, so
Anyway.
Mahito hits himself in the head.
Mhm.
And this kind of lays him up in bed. And he's not, his dad's like, oh, who did this? I'll make them pay. And of course, he doesn't say anything. He's like, But this is about when he finds the book we were talking about before, the copy of How Do You Live? And this is also when he sees Natsuko, his stepmother, venturing into the forest. And later that night, like, she hasn't come back. Everyone's like, well, where is she? And he and Kiriko, one of the old ladies, they go to this tower that's sitting on the grounds, and they try to get her back. He's like, oh, she must have gone there. And the Heron is also like, oh, she's here along with your mother. You have to come get her. He tries to outwit Mahito with like a fake form of his mother, and then the Heron tries to shush phone. You don't have to notify me twice.
Honestly, the mom melting would have been another prime opportunity for childhood trauma to be instilled, but no such luck.
I'm just saying, like, imagine if this was just like Grave of the Fire.
I mean, yeah, that would have been like, ooh.
That would have been like, there's no way you can't not pay attention to that. Where is it?
This.
But yeah, so the Heron tries to attack him, but he's made this bow and arrow with like the Heron's feathers, and he's able to put a hole in the Heron's beak, and this turns him into Goblin Man, like, permanently. And then a wizard tells him, like, oh, Heron, you have to guide the boy, and then they sink into the floor. And this is where things start to get really wacky.
Yeah, this is where we're, down the rabbit hole. We're through the looking glass.
Yes.
We're fully in, like, high fantasy mode.
Yeah. And we're in, like, this world of, like, souls, like the soul world. And we actually meet a younger Kiriko there. Old lady who's now, like, a strapping young woman who sails the seas and does cool stuff.
This was
and I think it's... Oh, go ahead.
It's just like as we get introduced to this world, they kind of like melt through the floor, and then it's this very like watery place with these like little islands and stuff, and it kind of lodged in my like amygdala or something the first time around, then really connected the second time, which, like, to say that like the art design or whatever in a Ghibli film is phenomenal is like the most obvious thing ever, but it was really interesting. The island that he lands on, then he meets Kiriko, the trees stuck out to me, and I was like, why are these so interesting? And for the one thing, it functions on kind of a utilitarian purpose, like it differentiates itself from like the kind of foliage that you're seeing at Mahito's estate in the countryside, like in the real world, if it were. But then I realized that, have you seen, there's a painting, I don't know by whom, called The Isle of the Dead. And it's this like island in the middle of like an ocean. And it's just this rocky thing with these tall, I think they're like cypress or pine or something trees. And I was like, it's that painting. And I like confirmed it. And it feels like this is a world of the dead, as you said. And it's just like how comprehensive he kind of builds that in. We have all these like derelict ships that are kind of around. We have this reference to classical art. It's just a really interesting detail. Like I can...
Interesting. I think I found it. Let me send you a link here. I'll also post it here for our
Yes, that's the one.
Experience.
Oh, there was a Rachmaninoff piece that we played in orchestra at one point when I was in college or something, and like this was a lithograph on the cover, and I was like, oh, and it just stuck with me.
And it has like a little boat. Oh my gosh, yeah,
I mean,
that is so fascinating.
Feels intentional.
See, like that's the thing, like I just feel like there's so much to uncover with this. Kind of talking about the Beavis, there's this part later, like there's a scene that comes soon after this where we find these things called the War War, who are like little like marshmallow baby things. And I love them so much. They're so cute. They're so adorable. Yep. And there's a point where like they're kind of like they're spiraling up, and it's like, oh, they are going to be born. And I don't know. Let's see. I wrote this down over here. So, and you just see this scene, like this background of this big, wide expanse of ocean. There's like little twinkling lights on the horizon. And it evoked something in me. When I was a kid, I grew up in like the Phoenix area, Phoenix, Arizona, and there's big, wide expanses there where there's like nothing. It's not like other parts of the country. There's like all like little hamlets along the way. No, there'll be nothing. Big, wide open space. And we'd be driving at night, and we just see these like little twinkling lights, and there's something about that, the sense of like transience and awe, this feeling of like being between places, and this kind of anticipation of like, oh, what's coming next, and this emotion that I felt like I had forgotten about, that I had never articulated before, and it just evoked that very particular sentiment in me.
Yeah, just this like sense of like vastness and profundity of the universe. It's a very like but very specifically like again, the vastness, the profundity, but also just an excitement. And I think that he's like, this is a major through line with those films. I know that he said in the past that like he makes each film for like a different intended age and stuff, but like he really captures, and like the Studio Ghibli at large, Takahata and everyone else too, he really like knows how to articulate that thing that you kind of remember from varying stages of this like primordial soup of like childhood memory or something, and he can just distill it down, and it's something as like really kind of awe-inspiring as what you just mentioned, or earlier in the film, like when he's kind of sitting up waiting for like his dad to get back, he falls asleep, and when he wakes up he like has to kind of sneak back to his bedroom because he's up past his bedtime, and I have like very distinct memories of doing similar things to that. So just like things that are very simple, things that are very kind of all-encompassing, like it's all here.
Exactly. There's just a very strong sense of, Hayao Miyazaki, he's able to evoke these emotions, to kind of evoke the sense of childhood again. And you see this in a lot of his movies. Because, and I feel like it kind of comes down to this idea where, again, as we grow up, when we're kids, you see the world and things are like so big, wonderful, and grand. It's like, your first Christmas is like nothing you've ever imagined before. Your first plane ride, your first train ride, like all these little things, even the big things are so wonderful and amazing. And then as you get to be an adult, you experience more of them. Like, okay, this is just, this is familiar now. I get how this goes. You see behind the curtain. You see how all this stuff gets made, how it all happens, and you lose that magic. And Miyazaki is really able to put us into a world where that magic can be felt again.
Yeah, it's not so much like nostalgia for nostalgia's sake as it is like a return of a sort.
Yeah. Almost kind of like the opposite of nostalgia. Yeah. Not like a soothing balm of, oh, you remember this. It's, look at this thing that you've never seen before, and yet it just feels so right. Feels so
familiar.
Yeah. And kind of to that end, the animation on this, I mean, what am I gonna say? Of course, it looks great. And it's interesting because you can kind of pick out places where they've been incorporating 3D animation into their workflow. And it's created like some interesting effects. And I believe this is the first movie that they've used the 3D animation.
Well, there was, Earwig and the Angry Inch or whatever the hell that was called?
Anyways, yeah, so this was the first movie that made with the 3D animation.
Oh, thank God.
And there's a couple moments where I was like you can kind of pick it out, but I'd be interested to see more of like a comprehensive piece of all the shots, because I think there was one. It was like when they're right on that threshold, like before they sink into the floor, of the Heron transforming into little goblin mode, man. And it's like this turnaround shot, like going around him. And I'm curious to see if that was a 3D animation or a 2D animation.
There were definitely beats throughout that felt like the fluidity was different. Like, not in the same way that you can create when you're animating, even like really with detail. Like, even as something simple as like when all the grannies were first like walking down the hallway, like that felt slightly different to other elements. The trapdoor, like closing them into this tower, felt different. Yeah, something like the beat that you're talking about. It was very well integrated. Just interesting tool to use.
With the latest video I put up on my main channel, I was talking about like 2D, 3D animation. And the thing is that for years, I've been a 3D animation apologist, because I feel like that it has a lot of potential that hasn't been tapped yet. And I'm glad to see that Studio Ghibli is like taking these tools, they're starting to kind of work with them to see what can be done with them. Because the thing is that I think people don't realize that computer animation is a lot more stuff than they realize. But that's a topic for another day. That's a tangent for another day. Anyway, so coming back to the little war, these little marshmallows that are going up into the sky to be born, and then pelicans come in and start eating them, and they're like, oh God, no!
Yeah, it's a massacre. Like I said, birds are the worst.
And then there's like another person on a boat who starts like shooting like fire, and it's like, oh, Lady Hime, she's shooting them down with the fire powers. And right away I was like, oh, this is Mahito's mother, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm kind of glad that they don't treat it like a big twist either. It's just like, it's something that he puts the two and two together, but it's not like a big deal. So I'm like, okay, so we're there.
Well, and this is where like the central ambiguity of this story really starts to set in, because the Warawara, we learn, like, they travel to this like congregation area where the young grandma, I forget her name, is like a fisherman essentially, and is feeding these Warawara, and they are basically like, I don't know if it's necessarily reincarnation, but they're like pre-born souls. And so you're getting a kind of the like combination of life and death and birth and afterlife kind of becoming one on one level, and then the act of like Lady Hime like ostensibly saving some of them, she also kills Warawara and Pelican alike. So there's this idea that there's this sort of imperfection to the way that things are.
Yeah, and especially with the because with the Warawara, like they eat like the guts of the fish and everything that are caught. And it's interesting because like, you know, it's like, oh, these things are cute, so we don't want them to be eaten. But shortly afterwards, there's on a second. Let me scroll to my low point here. Yeah, so shortly after this point, Mahito encounters a pelican who's injured from the battle and everything. And it's like, oh, we just needed to eat. We have tried to fly for forever to try to find food, and we never find anything, and it's kind of like, oh, like these things, like they're not evil.
Mm-hmm.
They just...
And let me tell you, it's bad luck to kill a seabird, so...
Oh, no. Okay. This is a very interesting Lighthouse reunion.
Yeah. They should have had it burb off, but they didn't.
Oh, no. That would have made this instant 10 out of 10. But, yeah, and then I think it was shortly after this is when the giant man-eating parakeets come into play?
Yep. We got our principal antagonist, because now we're pretty much, like, firmly on the journey of, like, let's go get stepmom.
Yeah. Again, like, this were, like, a lot of... I think it was at this point I was like, okay, like, because I was trying to, like, follow along still. At this point, I think I was like, oh god, like, there's more happening. There's more elements. I'm how to keep a track of what's going on.
Yeah.
This is, and at first I thought it was like, oh, like, maybe they're not... I was like, was it a joke? Maybe they're not actual manis? And then, like, no, they all wield, like,
they
forks
are
and knives.
ready to chow down.
Oh my god, this is terrifying.
It was also very funny. I was not prepared for how silly this movie was going to be.
Yeah, this was a pretty funny movie. Like, a lot of people were laughing at obviously the proper times. And I really like it because, like, it goes to, like, these, like, profound moments, and then it'll be something really silly will happen, and it all feels very well balanced. It feels like it goes naturally between these little between these different tones.
Yeah, you get a little bit of everything, as is life.
And then Mahito finds his stepmother Natsuko in this room that has, like, ribbons flying overhead. And again, I like this part where it's like you can kind of see, like, the CGI with the ribbons there. But I'm interested to see, like, if it continued through towards, and the ribbons start, like, blowing around and everything.
Yeah.
Going like a
little mummy, like, they have little, like, teeth, and they mummify everyone. It's very those little, like, paper things in Spirited Away is, like, adjacent to that.
And this is, like, this interesting moment because, like, he's like, oh, you have to come home, and she's, like, trying to resist him, even going like, oh, I hate you. And you're like, no, like, that's not true. We have seen that's not true. So it's yeah, like, what was your overall read on that scene?
That was the one that I kind of have the most, the biggest lack of thoughts about. Just it's the hardest for me to parse. It's interesting because, in a way, it's kind of a reversal of earlier, because, like, he's very reluctant. Like, she seems caring enough toward him, but he's very reluctant to, like, even go visit her when she's got morning sickness when they're back at the estate. So it's like, okay, is this a kind of a reversal of that? Like, is this how he views her position toward him beneath any and all, like, kind of politeness? Like, does he think that she hates him? And at the same time, he starts calling her mother in this scene. And so it's like this weird kind of, like, internal struggle that's manifested in this very sort of, like, heightened and, like, agitated way. He kind of becomes mummified and, like, passes through the veil, and it kind of seems to be when he first starts to, like, forgive her, or, like, kind of come to terms with how things will be moving forward. But it left a lot to interpretation.
Yeah, I feel like, because I'm trying to get a read on it as well, and, like, I'm not quite sure what it might be. if any of you, anybody listening wants, like, has, like, more perspective on this, or has, like, your own interpretation, like, leave it in the comments. Like, we would love to, you know, get a better understanding of this as we are, you know, trying to parse it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, I think it's after this, then, like, Mahito, he gets captured by the parakeets, and they're going to cook him up. And there's suddenly, like, a massive, like, civilization of these, like, cities and everything.
Yeah. We have Dave Bautista as the king. And also the Japanese version, too, is the guy from The Wailing, is what I know him from, at least. It's like a Korean horror film that's kind of about, like, Korean-Japanese, like, relations. And he plays, like, the baddie in it, essentially. So it's like, oh, it's that guy.
Oh. Yeah, this is... And we also meet, again, like, the wizard who had, like, given the Heron the directive to guide Mahito. And it turns out to be the great uncle of...
A grunkle, if you will.
Grunkle with... And he's like, oh, I want you to take over from me to, like, take care of it. Because it turns out this little tower is a meteorite that has, like, some crazy stuff going on in it.
It's like a multiverse meteorite.
The multiverse of meteors. And he's like, Mahito, I want you to take over from me. And there's, like, this interesting kind of dichotomy there, because Mahito's like, I don't think I'm not worthy to, because my hands have committed violence, even if against myself. He shows the scar. And the Parakeet King is like, oh, I'll just do it myself. And there's, like, these little blocks that, like, symbolize, like, the state of the world and how it's, like, kind of unstable. And he just, like, takes it, like, he puts it all together, and it doesn't work. And then the world starts to end.
Yeah, it's this idea of, like, the difficulty and the fleeting nature of existence and time and stuff, and it's manifest through this, like, metaphor of the blocks, like, how you kind of have to construct this like, when we see the Grunkle stacking the blocks, there's, like, a lot of points for, like, well, that feels like a really bad Jenga decision or something, but, like, that's kind of, in a way, it feels like the point. But this is where I get to both talk about Miyazaki's, like, fixation on, like, apocalypses, and also find a really ham-fisted way to talk for 800 minutes about Joe Hisaishi's score, because I love his music.
Yes. Tell me.
Yes.
All about it.
Yeah, like, it's so interesting to see, like, I feel like this kind of world-ending or world-threatening event is something that recurs throughout his filmography. You know, it's in Nausicaa, it's the very first film that he made, even before, like, Ghibli was, like, a thing, really. You know, kind of this, like, post-apocalyptic wasteland. It's Princess Mononoke, like, the disruption of the order of things by beheading the forest spirit, like, creates this catastrophe that threatens all of life. Even, like, Ponyo, the one that's like, it's for the kids, is like, there's, like, a biblical deluge in the middle of it and stuff. So it's like,
that caught me so off guard, because I was like, oh, I'm gonna see a cute little bunny, and then it's like, oh my god, the world's about to end.
Ponyo, is she in the sea? Oh fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, please continue.
No, but you know, so, like, this is clearly something that he's, like, really thought about, but it's interesting that this world ending here is so much more measured than it, like, you know, it's visually, it's kind of a combination of, like, the Mononoke, like, that there's, like, this large stone that's kind of hovering over the Grunkle. And, like, it kind of, it's interesting is that, like, it looks nothing like anything else in the film, and just so different to everything else. And then, like, when Dave Bautista, like, fucks up his little, like, Jenga experiment, it kind of, like, shivers and explodes, and it's very, like, tentacular, kind of like all those weird little things from the Nightwalker in Mononoke, and then you get the like Ponyo kind of like waves and stuff. It's very like visually crazy to look at, you know, them kind of running back through every room that they went to. But like, it's in a way, it's like calm and it's productive in a sense. And I think the music really like underscores that, because Mononoke, for example, the way that Hisaishi like uses his scoring completely changes. Like up to then it's this very sort of like beautiful but kind of conventional like sweeping like orchestral epic music, and then when the forest spirit gets beheaded, all of a sudden you've got this strange like electronic textures are introduced, you have like synths and stuff, and it's just very wrong and alien and different. Whereas here it's like it's the biggest kind of most sweeping statement in a score that's really beautiful but is fairly kind of simple and refined, but it's not something we haven't heard before. It's this kind of really lovely almost like, I don't know, Debussy evoking sort of like this wave of sound that kind of like builds and builds and builds but never really crests. Like you have this like foundation of warm brass, and you have these kind of shimmering, I don't know, string and upper woodwind figures kind of like flickering on top of that, and it just kind of keeps building with more elements. But the thing is, we've heard this like maybe 15 some odd minutes before, and it was when the parakeets are like first experiencing the Grunkle's world and they question if it's paradise. And to me, it kind of symbolizes this mirroring, is like, okay, they're fleeing the destruction of this specific created world, but they're running back to their lives, and they're running back to what they should be living. You know, Lady Himi will be running back to the path that will lead to her tragic death, but there's so much joy to be experienced in between there, and he's running back towards whatever awaits him. And so there is this positivity, and so I think it's interesting that Miyazaki takes an event that is so fundamentally changing but finds this sort of peace in it, and then Hisaishi kind of like through, you know, like they're such great partners creatively, like he finds a way to kind of mirror that sonically.
Yeah, I really loved just this ending where kind of like everything is kind of like coming crashing down. And also something that I realized thinking about it afterwards, because they talk about how you know, hold on a second, let me get back to I have to like move my notes around. I'm like, God, but you know, they're talking about Mahito's mother, how she had disappeared in this tower for a year when she was little. And I realized, oh my God, that's like her coming back out of the doors, her returning from that year-long absence.
Right.
It's like the timeline's all converging and everything. And I was like, oh, that's like a really interesting little detail that didn't pick up at the first time around. I was like, oh, wait a minute. But yeah, and I really also like the, you know, I feel like this concept, again, like coming back to the blocks, and the idea of, you know, the great uncle has built this world, but it's an imperfect world. It's a world where there are giant man-eating parakeets. And, you know, the whole thing, like, oh, they're marching through the streets, you know, the king and everything, who's like trying to, like, I don't know, become the successor to God or something.
Basically.
And, you know, that kind of ties in again with the war that's going on. You know, Mahito's father is active in the war effort. He runs a factory that's making components for the warplanes. And so like, I feel like that kind of connects in there with the setting and the idea that Mahito has the humility to say, I am not worthy to try to put something as important as a new block on this world, where the Parakeet King is like, oh, I know exactly what to do, and he just messes it all up, and then everything comes crashing down.
Yeah, well, and I'm just now thinking about it, like, even like the Grunkles act. It has a sort of like futility and vanity to it. Like the fact that this like stacking of the blocks can only create potential for perfection for 3 days, I think he says, like underlines that like just how impossible it is to truly attain just like a perfect, flawless world. Like he questions why Mahito would want to go back to the world in flames, as he calls it, or whatever. But it's like, that's all we have. Like, you cannot perfect the world, so you just have to live in it.
And how do you do that?
How do you live?
That's a question. Yeah, like, again, there's so much going on in this movie. There's like a lot of little ideas that kind of swirl around. And at least at the moment, I don't know if I could like put together like a big overarching structure for this movie. But I would love to see it again and just try to maybe understand it more and more. Maybe there's more context. And honestly, like anybody listening to this again, like if you have your own interpretations of this, if you have your own ideas on what different things mean, things that might be different from what we took away from it, let us know in the comments, because we would love to read it. We'd love to maybe even like have a discussion about how all these different components all come together.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what different people take away from that. And I think that's what makes something like this so fascinating, is like there may be some grand design to it all, but there also just may not.
You know, maybe it's just a very lovely movie that has a lot of little interesting things.
A lot of compelling ideas sort of arranged artfully.
Yeah, do you have any other components you want to talk about? Any other aspects you want to hit on?
Well, I was glad that I stuck around after the credits, because I really liked the scene at the end where Alfred Hitchcock came out and invited Hayao Miyazaki into the Bird Ventures initiative. It was really fun. I'm very excited for further installments of that.
Okay. I think they're going to get like the Rio people on board.
Yeah, Rio,
then...
the folks behind Birdemic. Like, it's going to be great. Birds are going down.
The BCU is coming to a theater near you.
Pure Kino.
Fucking never. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this for this great movie.
It's always a pleasure.
Next week we'll be back talking about Wonka.
God.
Get ready. You thought this was you thought this had some crazy stuff going on. Oh, we've seen nothing yet.
I'm so ready for Timmy C to just wonk all over me.
Oh, that's... Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
If you want to follow us, I'm at Daniel Goldhorn on YouTube. Reynard is at /cinema on Tumblr. Oh, sorry.
You silenced me. I said last week that I wouldn't be silenced, but apparently I can be.
Oh. Do you want to do the reading?
No, it's okay.
Okay. And we'll see you all next week. Take care.
Bye.